Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Beisel and I'm here to talk to you about range of motion. First of all, I'd like to thank Josh for his presentation on yoga earlier. We all know that yoga is a proven way to increase your range of motion. But due to lack of room in here, I was going to ask everybody to stand up and give me a brief demonstration of your own range of motion to kind of enlighten yourself on what you have. So I was going to have everybody go ahead and bring their hands all the way up over their heads. Everybody looks pretty good, because everybody probably believes that they have good range of motion here, so go ahead and bring it down. And then I was going to ask everybody to stand up and reach down and go for their toes. What? So is everybody in the room pretty capable of getting to at least their toes?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and stand on up. Great. Cody can everybody can go ahead and have a seat.
Yeah, Sasquatch, let's do it.
Well, great. So, for the introduction, I wanted to talk about what we're going to cover. We're going to put a definition on range of motion. We're going to talk about a very simple way, and we're just going to touch on a couple more complicated ways of measuring range of motion. We're going to look at some factors that do affect range of motion in terms of like a biomechanical standpoint, and then just how our bodies are built. We're going to look at how range of motion affects strength, and conversely, we're going to look at how strength can affect range of motion. We're going to look at a couple methods to improve range of motion, like yoga from our earlier presentation. We're going to talk about the timing of certain flexibility routines to improve your range of motion, and again, how that's going to affect your strength. And then we're going to kind of sum it all up, and hopefully I'm going to give you something to put in your toolbox as a future strength coach to help with your athletes. So first off, to give you a really appropriate definition, and it's a little bit long, so it's the angle through which a joint moves from anatomical position. We all familiar with anatomical position? Standing upright, palms forward, arms extended down to the side. Through which a joint moves from anatomical position to extreme limit of segment of motion in a particular direction. Or just to really sum it up, how far a joint moves. So we're talking about anatomical position. We're looking at flexion, extension. We're going to look at flexion, extension of the elbow, hip, knee. I'm not going to touch too much on abduction and adduction today, just to keep things a little simple. But that's just wanted to make sure that we all have a good reference for what we're going to be talking about. So, first off, measuring range of motion. Has anybody in the room used a goniometer? Pretty much everybody? Great. So we've all used the goniometer probably through our studies, if you've studied exercise science. But that is pretty much simply a protractor. What you're going to do with that is you're going to find a landmark at a joint, we'll say the shoulder. You're going to place it here. You're going to line the arms of that protractor up, and as that arm moves through range of motion, you line the protractor up to make your measurement. It can be some error associated with measuring range of motion, just because if you're not really familiar with those landmarks. But with time and learning to use the tool correctly, you will get better with it. A couple other things that they have out there is a latent flexometer, an electrogoniometer, and I also saw a couple different things in the terms of taking still photos and then scientists applying trigonometric methods to measure their range of motion. Next, we're going to talk about some factors that influence range of motion. First off, we're going to talk about the articulating surface, or the type of joint that we're working with. So obviously we have a pivot joint, such as your radial ulnar joint or your neck. You have your standard ball and socket, your shoulder, your hip. You have a saddle joint, your thumb. Then you have your standard hinge joints, elbows and knees. Obviously, is everybody familiar with Greg Valentino here? Who thinks Greg Valentino has some limited range of motion? Should be pretty obvious that muscle tissue and fatty tissue can also be a hindrance upon your range of motion. But a couple other things are age and gender. Now, age and gender when it comes to range of motion, and that's not so much as the older you get, you lose it. you lose it as you age because you stop being so active. And this is something that nobody knew. As women become pregnant and have a child, they become more. They get a little extra range of motion due to some hormones that are produced. Their ligaments and tendons get a little bit more flexible. But muscles have elasticity and plasticity. Elasticity being the ability to extend to a certain length and then bounce all the way back. And then plasticity, which is going to be what we're going to be trying to enhance, being able to extend to a position and then kind of hold or be able to maintain that new lengthened position. So in order to move forward with range of motion, I thought we should talk about some neuromuscular responses to stretch. First, we're going to just touch base on this real briefly, just a little bit of a review. Your Golgi tendon organs, you all know that they should be located in your tendon, near the muscle tendon joint, and they sense tension. The Golgi tendon organ inhibits tension in stretched muscle, and it activates the antagonist muscle. We're going to look at a couple methods that we probably have done in the past, called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, as one of our methods to enhance your range of motion later on. So we'll talk a little bit more about autogenic inhibition and reciprocal inhibition when we get there. So next we have our muscle spindles, which are going to be located in the muscle fibers themselves, and they run parallel. So those are going to detect stretch, and they're going to help with something called stretch reflex. So I personally am, when I do my squats, I'm a kind of a deep squat guy. And I kind of have a tendency to bounce out of it a little bit. So I think I'm relying on my stretch reflex. So instead of stopping here, I get all the way down and bounce out of it. Might call it cheating. Some people might call it bad form. I like the deep squat. But something that the muscle spindles do, they inhibit the antagonist tension, and then, like I said, they promote that stretch reflex, and also we're going to be using those muscle spindles when we get into that proprioceptive PNF stretching, for sure. We're going to look at, why don't we skip the muscle one? Okay, sorry about that, but we're going to move on to athletes and how range of motion is affected and affects resistance training. First off, we're going to look at the preseason measurement of range of motion. So I found a 2007 study of some elite soccer players. These guys were in the English Premier Soccer League. And what they did is they took 36 soccer players in the 2003-2004 season, and they measured all their range of motion going into it. The only thing that excluded the players from being involved in the study is if they had some sort of musculotendinal injury within 2 months of actually beginning their training. So what they did is they recorded all the muscle strains in the lower extremities over the course of the training period, and what they found were, out of those 36 players, 32 players became injured. 9 players per every 1,000 hours of training that they had. The way that they find that this benefited them is they thought that by measuring range of motion pre-season, they think that they could be able to identify at-risk players, and then hopefully somebody who has limited range of motion, they would be able to assign them a little more aggressive flexibility routine, helping to try and enhance that range of motion as they go, to hopefully, like I said, keep them on the field. But some of the injuries that those players received were knee flexion. The 29% of the players experienced something in regards to knee flexion. Hip flexion was 24%, and then knee extension, 18% of the players had an injury associated with that movement. So range of motion during actual resistance training. So I found 2 studies. I found one for the lower body, and I found one for the upper body. So like I said, I'm a deep squat kind of guy. But what we did here is we took 17 male students, and we put them on a 12-week resistance training program, and they compared a deep squat versus a shallow squat. The deep squat was characterized as going from 0 degrees, standing completely erect, down to about 120. And the shallow squat was 0 to about 60 degrees. So if I'm at 90 here, these shallow squat guys were stopping here. That deep squat were going significant, almost, they were going actually double. And what they found was that the people who got into the deep squat position over the course of the 12 weeks, they improved 20% plus or minus 3% in both categories, deep squat and shallow squat. The shallow squat people, they actually improved a little bit more in their shallow squat, but significantly less in the deep squat. The shallow squat improved 36 plus or minus 4%, and the deep squat improved, for the shallow squat guys, improved their deep squat only by 9 plus or minus 2%. They also measured cross-sectional area of the thigh. Shallow squat, there was no difference. Deep squat improved 4 to 7% depending on the player. And also their squat jump and the, I think it's peak torque of knee extension, that increased as well. And that study was done at the Norwegian School of Sports. So I think that kind of shows that increased range of motion, deep squat is going to be a little bit more beneficial than stopping here. And I know this next study is going to probably hit a little close to home for as much as everybody likes curling. And I hate to tell you, but we want to do, again, range of motion for your curls. So again, we put some people on training twice a week for a 10-week program. And again, it was just linear periodization. Here we can have a guy sitting at a preacher bench, and that's the apparatus that they use for this curling program. But what they did is they placed a metal bar at they put a metal bar to limit their range of motion from 50 to 100 degrees, whereas the full range of motion was 0 all the way down to 130. And so the full range of motion people improved their 1 RM by 25 plus or minus 9.7%, and they had a 9.7 increase in muscle thickness. Those are the two variables that they measured. Whereas the people who were doing partial range of motion only had a 16 plus or minus 6.9% in 1 RM, and then 7.37% in muscle thickness. Something that they found is using full range of motion, you can use a little bit less weight than the partial range of motion people did. So they said that could actually allow for a little bit less stress on the joint. Just by going through full range of motion, you're getting greater gains for muscle thickness and on your 1 RM, as opposed to using a heavier weight, just cut short on your curls. Something that the study did do, though, is it did acknowledge that there could be benefit in later stages of training for doing partial curls. So next I want to look at range of motion as a result of resistance training. So we have a 2011 study where they compared resistance training versus static stretching. They took the two and simply put one group of people on one program, put another group of people on another. So resistance training, they did a 3-day split, full body, 5 days a week. They did 4 sets of each exercise, and the program took roughly 45 minutes to an hour for that group to complete. The static stretching people did a 2-day-a-week, 5-week program as well. So the static stretching people did 1 day less. They did 1 to 3 sets of 30 seconds of static stretching for 14 different stretches to cover the entire body. That program lasted 25 to 35 minutes. So something I thought was notable was that both programs, resistance training and flexibility program, were both developed by people who hold the certification that we all have or are going to be getting shortly after you're done with school. They're certified strength and conditioning specialists. But what they found was that both improved and equal results. They each had equal results compared to the control group. So, contrary to popular belief, you don't, just because you're gaining mass, unless you go to the limits of Greg Valentino, resistance training actually does benefit your range of motion. Well, the other study that I had found was another one that compared strength, flexibility, a combination of the both, and then on how the gains that they made. So this was a study done by women. They took 4 groups and they split them up into strength, flexibility, a strength and flexibility group, and then they had a control. Again, this was a 16-week program. They did a pre and post stretch. They did a pre and post sit and reach test. They did a 10 RM test on leg press and bench, and then they put them through the appropriate programs with which the group that they were assigned to. The strength program, it was, like I said, it was a 16-week program, and I think it was linear progression as well. Weeks. The first 4 weeks they did sets of 8 to 12 for all their exercises. Second 4 weeks they did 6 to 10. Third 4 weeks 10 to 15, and then the final 4 weeks they did 8 to 12 reps. Whereas the static, the flexibility program that they had the people on, whether they were with flexibility only, strength and flexibility together, or the control. Well, the control I don't think did anything. Right? But they started at a 15-second stretch, and then they progressed to a 60-second stretch over the course of those 16 weeks. And I think that what they found is every single group increased over the control, whether you were just flexibility alone, strength and flexibility, or just strength. So improving range of motion. So we have a couple different types of stretching. We have active stretching. Active stretching was when you are actually having a partner assist you with that. So we do that, I think, every day out in the field, or some of the players have us do that. So that's where you're actually using another stimulus, like I said, to help with the stretch. Then you have passive stretching, where you would just kind of, if I'm stretching my hamstrings, I'm just sitting here, just letting kind of gravity do its work. So improving range of motion. We have ballistic stretching, which is a bouncing motion. It's not necessarily considered one of the best types of stretching. It's not going to be preferred. It does trigger the stretch reflex. Like I said, again, bouncing motion is going to be here. So my hamstrings, when I bounce, is that the muscle spindles want to cause my hamstring to contract in the opposite direction. Then we have dynamic stretching, which is something that we do. I cut over static stretching. So again, that's going to be something that I like to have people do personally, and I try to do this on a regular basis. Just simple, controlled stretching. And we're going to look at another study after I'm done with this slide that's going to show how static stretching can actually be invaluable. So again, the static stretching does not trigger that stretch reflex. So then finally we have dynamic stretching. That's going to be something like your mobility drills, and it's going to be more sport or activity specific. So here we are, again, improving range of motion. So something I wanted to talk about a little bit was your proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, and there's three main methods of that. There's going to be hold and relax, which is you're going to start out with a passive stretch with a partner. This does require assistance from somebody else. So that person's going to say you're going to stretch a hamstring. You're going to go with a passive stretch for 10 seconds. And then the person that's being stretched is going to apply force, but you're not going to allow them to move. And you're going to hold that for approximately 6 in that isometric position. And then they're going to relax, and that should allow the person being stretched to go a little bit farther. And that is going to be due to the should be the Golgi tendon organ, the GTOs, and that's going to be, I think, autogenic inhibition. I could be totally screwing this up, but we'll move forward to contract relax method. That's going to be a passive stretch again here with the 10-second on that passive from the person that's doing the stretching. Then the second piece is going to be where the person being stretched is going to be apply force, but they're going to be allowed to move all the way through that range of motion. That should take approximately 6 seconds, followed by another relaxation period, and the person being stretched is going to be stretched out for about another 30 seconds. And our final method here is going to be the hold, relax with agonist. Again, agonist contraction. It's going to be a passive pre-stretch for 10 seconds, resistance by the athlete for 6 seconds. And I think that's, again, screw that up. I think that's supposed to be agonist contraction. So the person being stretched would contract, if they're doing a hamstring stretch, they're going to contract their quad to try and get the reciprocal inhibition. Which doesn't sound right to me. But so optimal stretching times. We had a 2005 study of the LSU indoor track and field team. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was the study. The team was competing in 2005, but the study was published in 2008, where the track and field athletes completed a dynamic warm-up, and then they completed a static stretch following that. They had two groups. One was an experimental, one was control. The dynamic warm-up started out with an 800-meter jog, and then it was forward and backward skips and side shuffles, and that warm-up took approximately 30 minutes. The static stretch was simply 4 passive partner-assisted stretches, and that were held for 30 seconds to point of mild discomfort. So as we can see here, for each stretch protocol in the 20-meter sprint that they completed, there was a 3.21 time for that 20-meter sprint. When the people did not stretch, follow with that static stretch, they were actually a little bit faster. And the way that when they did this study, they considered that to be a significant enough change to say that static stretching isn't going to be beneficial for, we'll say, sprinters leading into what their activity is. Again, we had a 40-meter sprint time where the stretch protocol, the people who followed the static stretch protocol did a 5.7 in that 40 meters, and the people who did not do the static stretch had a 5.6 time. So, in summary, I tried to give you guys a clear definition of the range of motion. We talked about some measurement and application of it. The factors that affected range of motion through resistance training. We talked about some research proving that working through greater range of motion can benefit strength and range of motion simultaneously. Talked about just one particular method, I guess, of improving range of motion. And then when to stretch. So again, we're going to be working with dynamic warm-up, dynamic stretching before we actually do our activity or lifting session. And some recommendations that I thought were, like I said, something to put in your toolbox. By measuring range of motion leading into a season, I think that you have the potential to, like I said, develop a flexibility program that will benefit the athletes and hopefully keep them on the field, as opposed to suffers different strains and injuries. And then again, you can develop a more improved flexibility routine, and then monitor range of motion with regular statistics. And those are my references.